we are with two eminent tax stalwarts, if I could call.
Old tax people.
Absolutely. To my right is Stef van Weeghel, PwC Global Tax Policy Head, University of Amsterdam Professor, and Chair of the Board of Trustees at IBFD.
Sure.
To his right, Jeffery Owens, again someone who needs no introduction to any serious tax professional, the former head of the former tax policy director at OECD and Vienna University professor. Stef, we'll start with you. Stef was the panel chair at the most riveting panel discussion, not only at this IFA Congress, but one of the most engrossing panel discussions in the last 7 years that I've been privileged to attend this Congress, Stef. And you started with a quote from Robert F. Kennedy saying that we live in interesting times. Did you also say we live in dangerous times, Stef?
Well, that was the comparison I was making, and I truly think we do live in dangerous times in the tech space, because you see in the current discussion and the enormous pressure, political pressure, unilateral measures popping up in many countries. I think Chip Harter made that very clear that if there is no end to that, the whole system, there may be systematic risk. Yeah, I think this. I mean, in the what is it, 30-something years? I know I'm a child that I've been in this profession. I have never seen a more challenging time than today.
Why do you say so? I mean, if you could pick...
Come on that, because in fact, I mean, just to support what you're saying, Steph, because what was the expression I took away? The status quo is no longer an option. That's the first time I've heard that in 43 years, huh? The status quo. So basically we're at a time where we're reconsidering what our international taxes are. And I think the conflict we've got, on the one side we know we need to adapt, on the other side we also know that we need to build on what we've got rather than chuck everything out, yeah? And that's the real challenge, finding where that margin is, what are the where areas do we have to adjust, and what can we keep from the old system.
Yeah, Steph, if you could look at some of the key takeaways from the panel, some of the deliberations, the possible approaches, and none of them is a simple straight-jacket approach as a solution to the vexed issue of the challenges of digitalization. Could you just sum up the entire discussions for us on the residual profit allocation, possible solution, a new nexus approach, overlaying of the new approach with transfer pricing, and could you just sum it up with us?
Yeah, well,
and then we'll come to the US angle.
Some of this, Arun, is clearly crystal ball work. But,
I know, but still.
Yeah, but the nexus will be expanded, so we will get a nexus criterion that goes way beyond the fixed establishment, the permanent establishment we have today, and be it revenue or revenue in combination with something else, that's what's likely. And then on how we allocate profits, there will certainly still be a role for the arm's length principle.
How will the residual split method work for our viewers?
Well, that's again, I'm speculating as to where we may land on that. But I guess some of the features, have come out over time. So we will have remuneration. So we look at the total profit of the group worldwide. A total profit, because we don't know which benchmark or which method we're going to use there. And then we'll allocate to routine functions a certain profit based on, I think, the arm's length principle, but perhaps with a bit more fixing in the sense of fixed margins.
Threshold.
Yes. And then we'll end up, and that, by the way, includes in the home in the residence country, but also in the market if there is a distribution function or something. And then we'll end up with the let me call it residual profit, and that's where a formulaic approach may be adopted, where basically that residual will be divided between the market and the residence country. Those are features that I would not be surprised to see emerging at the end of this discussion. And then the big question, of course, is what will the margins be for the routine things? What will the formula be to divvy up? Will it be revenue based or perhaps something else? So that's I think what I get from the current discussion.
And just to add to that, because I think one, we are at a critical stage, I think. two, it does worry me a little bit, the time pressure, yes? If we can get agreement in principle in the next few months, that's fine, but I think it's going to then take a number of years to actually get the rules in place. Second comment is that it's not enough just to have the rules in place, we must have then consistent implementation. Yeah? That requires that all the countries that commit understand what they're committed, and I'm afraid that there needs to be a pretty substantive peer review process there as well. Second comment, I think, is that on nexus versus the attribution, I actually think the nexus issues are a little bit easier to deal with. We seem to be working towards a solution. And, frankly, when I joined the OECD in 1972, we were discussing the PE concept. When I left in 2012, we were discussing the PE concept. It's a concept that's evolving, so I see this as just the next stage in that evolution. The attribution, for the reasons you said, is much more different. People talk about residual profit. Do we really know what we're talking about?
The US representative, Jeffrey, just to cut you, the US representative did not seem too impressed, quite honestly, Mr. Harter, with some of the views on how do you allocate taxing rights to market jurisdictions. To put it quite bluntly, he said we would look at appropriating or allocating a little more than what we are currently doing, based on a grand bargain, Jeffrey. Of better administrability of tax.
But at least he was open to considering the ideas. I think the big difference was that he saw this as something that was happening at the margin. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the question then is that going to be enough to satisfy countries like India or Brazil or China? Yeah. And there's also this question of, as I said, how do you actually measure residual profits? And when you do measure them, how do you reallocate them? Yeah. And there, even if this is just seen as another adaptation of the arm's length principle, you need to have some principles behind it. I'm quite happy with fixed margins and some safe harbors. Yes? That's something we've done already.
But I think, Jeffrey, if I could read Mr. Harter's mind correctly, or his words carefully, he seemed to suggest isolate the extreme cases of super profits, isolate those cases. Stef, am I right in reading that? He kept on using the word allocation of residual profits above certain thresholds will isolate cases where extremely valuable intangibles are exploited.
I'll be very cautious here. If you really want to know the answer, ask Mr. Harter.
Yeah.
I would think. But you saw how the panel emerged. So at some point, you got Chip Harter talking, Hui Min, Chia Turn talking. You had Natalia talking, and I said for a reason you're watching a negotiation in the inclusive framework. So it may be, we're not talking substance over form here, but incremental could be a term of art here or a defined term. And how does the word incremental relate to the Big Bang that Secretary General Gurria mentioned on Sunday? So I think there's still a lot of debate going on what the incremental actually means.
Jeffrey,
and in particular, because unlike the original BEPS debate was really about a debate of how do we close off avenues for aggressive tax planning, how do we close off avenues for taxing. That's somewhere everybody can gain. In this one, it's who gets what. It's about how do we divide the revenue base up. And we're questioning the rules that we've had in place for more than 60 years on that basis. So that's why the impact assessments, I can see why it's useful, but they're also dangerous because it's actually going to show who gains and who loses. Yeah? And are the losers prepared to pay that price, in fact, to get the consensus? Yeah? And that's where I think everybody kept emphasizing on the panel, the status quo is not an option. Yeah? And that's already a significant agreement. Yeah? That we have to do something, yeah?
Yeah, and I agree. And the point that Chip Harter made towards the very end, I think, is a key point. The focus here of a country should not be, as of today, would I lose or gain? The prospect of not reaching consensus is chaos. So the sort of the sustainability of the system is at stake here, and that's what everyone has to keep in mind.
And that's why this whole, trying to discourage unilateral action. It's this debate unilateralism versus multilateralism. I've always felt, the move towards multilateralism is better, but of course there has to be multilateral solutions that satisfy the needs of everybody. Yeah, particularly the non-OECD countries, the developing countries, and they have to have systems that they can actually administer. Yeah, as capable of being administered, and they also have to ask themselves, not just what are the impact of any proposals that come out next year on our economy as it is today, on our enterprise, but as they will be in 10, 15 years, because any agreement that's made next year it's going to stick for the next 50 years, yes? And that requires, whether it's the Chinese or the Indians or Colombia, to ask the question, as the structure of our economies change, are these rules going to work for us? Yeah?
Stef and Jeffrey, quick note on what the industry representative on the panel said, lest we lose sight of the fact that all of this is to tax industry and allocate their taxes. Amy said, representing Procter & Gamble, one of the biggest multinational companies in the world, a Fortune 500 company.
And a good taxpayer, by the way.
Yeah.
Good taxpayer. Yeah?
So she identified five areas which go into making profits or a successful product. One is the product itself, the packaging, marketing, advertising, retail, execution, users. So, there were some panelists who believe that you cannot allocate disproportionately to the market, that you cannot overestimate what market contributes or give a disproportionate weight to the market. Whereas if you talk to someone like India's Mr. Akhilesh Ranjan, CBDT member, who would believe that India should get a fair share based on the number of users, the fact that its market is being exploited. So I think Amy brought to the fore the factors which contribute to the success and to the profits. The question is, how do you apportion the weight between them? As much as the residual profit split allocation sounded simple, it's not going to be.
Well, just to give an example, let's admit that Air India buys a Boeing plane, yeah? India hasn't contributed at all to the manufacture of the plane, but does it now mean that India has the right, in fact, to tax part of the profits that are made in that plane? Because without India buying it, there would be no market value, yeah? It's an interesting example. And that's why I like the panel kicking off with the 3D. Tax people haven't plugged into the revolution that's here, the challenge to our source and the challenge to customs and tariffs, yeah? There's a whole range of issues here, so it's not a simple area. Yeah?
It's not simple, Stef.
No, but to me this goes back to the core of the issue. We have lived with a system that's been around for close to 100 years.
Change will be difficult.
And with a certain, with all the parameters that we defined. So even in our current thinking, we're still thinking about, the involvement of significant people, etc., etc. But the truth of the matter is that you don't need that anymore to penetrate a market. So what the end result will be, and I sympathize very much with everything that Amy expressed there, the true end game of this is a political compromise. Yes. It's a reset that may have something to do with value creation and traditional principles, because that is our point of departure. But at the end of the day, it's just an agreement, who gets to tax which part of the global profits. Full stop.
Is that so different from the London Convention debate, from the debate to the OECD in 1963? It always, at the end of the day, was a political debate, because the whole issue of tax treaties is it's about how do you share the tax base out. Yeah? And inevitably, when those agreements were made, the global economy was very differently structured. China wasn't even on the map. India was economically, yeah? And now, in a sense, we're saying, well, with these changes in economic structures, with the change in technology, we need to have a reconsideration. And the difficulty is, it implies reallocating the tax base, yeah? Significantly. Yeah. Not at the margin, but significantly. Yeah?
Last question, moving away from tax. Brexit, a no-deal Brexit, US-China trade war, geopolitical uncertainty across the world. How do you see this situation? In an era of tax uncertainty right now, or tax policy volatility, some would call it, where do you see these events, which are far bigger than tax?
You started with the quote I did from Robert Kennedy.
Yeah.
It's dangerous. It's exciting, but I don't want to underscore the excitement, the danger part, because this is really, it doesn't get to tax and tariffs. It's much more. It's a stability of an element in the stability of the world. So I don't want to think about it, frankly.
But I think the reality is that, looking at it from my perspective of OECD, I've never seen so much political uncertainty. I've never seen so much economic uncertainty, and that is already having a very negative effect on global trade. Yeah, and global trade and global FDI have always been the engines of growth. Yeah, and what we need to do as a tax community is try to minimize the amount adding tax uncertainty to this toxic mix of political and economic uncertainty. And that's why I think this whole issue of dispute resolution, I was really happy to hear Pascal saying this is very much at the center of this debate. And we have to actually ask, well, how do we do that? Yeah, how do we minimize disputes using APAs, using rulings, cooperative compliance programs, and how do you resolve them? And accept that the current map, frankly, is not up to scratch. Yeah, so we need to move into something more. Call it arbitration, call it mandatory dispute. Mediation, yeah? We need to find more effective mechanisms to resolve disputes, because at least that would give a comfort factor to the multinationals. If you have a dispute, it's going to be resolved on a principled basis, on an effective basis. It's not going to take 15 to 20 years to get an answer.
12 months from now, one line answer, one line. Will we have more global uncertainty or less?
I think more. I think we will have consensus with lots of technical details to address.
Consensus on principle and then a long haul on how you apply them in practice.
One Indian industrialist once said, there will be long days and there will be long nights. Jeffery is preparing us for a long haul. Stef van Weeghel, Jeffery Owens, two of the most respected, eminent voices in the world of international tax at the London Congress. Thanks so much for speaking to Tax Ultra.
You're welcome.
Thank you.